Hello, my name is Karen Emmerich, and I'm going to be reading from my translation of Alki Zei's novel, The Wildcat Behind Glass. It's a book for young readers set in Greece in 1936 about the rise of fascism in Europe. And it was written when Alki Zei herself was living in exile in the USSR in the early 1960s. And the narrator for the book is an 8-year-old girl named Melia, and she has an older sister named Myrto. And this passage describes the beginning of their summer. They leave every summer from the town on the island where they live to go to a village with their grandfather and their great aunt, and their parents come on weekends to visit. And the only thing that you really need to know that you wouldn't otherwise is that they have this code. They sort of speak to one another in a kind of coded language. And they, every night when they go to bed, they say to one another in the room that they share, either they ask Veha, Vesa, and Veha means very happy, and Vesa means very sad. And so they're checking in about their day, and that appears at the very end of the passage I'll read. The village where we spend our summers is right across from town on the other side of the bay. At night, we can see the lights from town, and if there's no wind, we can even hear voices in the distance. The village is called Lamagari, and it's not exactly a village. All of the people who live there work at these long, narrow buildings called cellars, even though they're above ground, which are full of barrels of wine. They live in tiny houses with low ceilings, some made of stone and others of mud bricks, which everyone calls shanties. There are also a few 2-story stone houses with terraces and gardens, which the people in Lamagari call towers, even if they only have 3 rooms, like ours. That's where families who own cellars spend the summer. Except for us. We don't even have a single old barrel to our name that we could push into the sea and row around in like a real boat. But we do have our very own tower in Lamagari, because once, a long time ago, grandfather's father used to have cellars, only he sold them so that grandfather could go away to university and buy all his ancients. Lamagari is only half an hour by boat from town. Every summer we arrange for Mr. Andonis, the ferryman, to come and get us in his sailboat, the Cristallia. It's a strange name for a boat, but it was the name of his wife, who drowned. Sometimes when he comes to get us, Mr. Andonis brings his daughter Artemis, who's our best friend in Lamagari. We always leave with Aunt Despina and grandfather. Father and mother only come on weekends, thank heavens. Father didn't grow up on an island, and he's so terrified of the sea that he won't let us go anywhere on our own. He thinks we're so silly we might slip off the jetty and fall headfirst into the water and drown. But all Aunt Despina cares about is that we don't track sand into the house and that we wash our feet each night before bed. As for the sea, salt water is good for the skin, she always says. And grandfather's only rule is that each evening we try to remember the ancient proverb he taught us at breakfast that morning. The night before we leave for Lamagari, Father always sits us down to deliver his 10 commandments, as Myrto and I call them. He tells us the same things every year, so we've learned them by heart. Father's 10 commandments. 1. Don't swim out where it's deep. 2. Don't walk barefoot. 3. Don't stay in the sea for hours. 4. Don't climb trees. 5. Don't eat unripe grapes off the vine. 6. Don't eat any grapes unless they're washed. 7. Don't get into a boat without an adult. 8. Don't climb on the rocks. 9. Don't go farther than Aunt Despina's voice can carry. 10. Don't bicker. We always listen and always say, "Yes, Father." But as soon as we arrive in Lamagari, the list flies right out of our minds. How on earth are we supposed to do all those don'ts? And if we do, what's the point of being in the country? So we keep the 10 commandments only on weekends, which we call our misery. When the other kids make plans to meet up at the rocks to search for crabs or barnacles, we say, "We can't, it's our misery today." We were sitting on the sun porch waiting for Mr. Andonis to come and get us. The sea was full of boats, but we spotted the Cristallia right away. He's coming, we shouted, each leaning out a window to try and see if Artemis was with him. Soon we could make out a tiny red dot beside Mr. Andonis, swaying this way and that with the waves. Then we heard distant cries floating to us over the sea. "Myrto! Melia! Artemis! Greece, we hollered at the top of our lungs, since now we could see our friend clearly in a red dress, waving her arms and legs in excitement. As soon as we got into the boat, we started hugging. Calm down, you'll tip the house. That's what Mr. Andonis calls his boat, the house. Maybe because he sleeps in it all summer long. Artemis is a year older than me and a year younger than Myrto, which means she's friends with us both. She's never been to school, and Mr. Andonis can't teach her at home because he never went to school either. But Artemis knows all kinds of things, the names of every single fish in the sea, even the tiniest ones. What bait works best for each, which rocks have barnacles and which the shrimp like to swim around. She fishes all by herself, even for octopuses. And if Mr. Andonis would let her, she could even sail a boat. What's the Wildcat been up to? Artemis whispered. And we spilled the news right away, how it had turned to face the sea. All the kids had gathered on the jetty to wait for us. Nolis, Odysseus, even little Alki. They started shouting all at once when they saw us, and as soon as we set foot on dry land, they pulled out some little reed whistles and started tooting away. Aunt Despina, Grandfather, and Mr. Andonis went on ahead with our things to our tower, and we followed behind with the kids. Stamatina was waiting for us at our tower. She'd come the day before to clean and get the house ready. Right away, we took off our sandals. Myrto even gave one of hers a toss, and it landed up high on a shelf. There go Father's 10 Commandments, she said. So I'm going to skip a few pages now in the interest of time and just finish out the chapter. Now they have a barrel that they're going to use to sail in the water. Nolis was right. The barrel floated just like a real boat. We decided to think up the perfect name, then give it a proper baptism when Nikos came. Nikos is their older cousin who's working for the resistance. But then what a quarrel broke out. Only 3 kids could fit in the barrel, and Nolis and Myrto had set themselves up in there like kings and refused to budge. I only rode in it once. Then I got tired of waiting for my turn to come again, so I dove into the sea. It was my first swim of the year. How wonderful it is to swim. Diving deep and long with your eyes open, seeing the seaweed wave at you from below like strange hands, and tiny fish and even seahorses that swim upright like they're standing. And your body feels so light, like you're flying. I don't think there's a sea in the world more beautiful than the one in Lamagari. Sometimes it's shaded by the pine trees that grow right next to the water, and then it's as green as a grape leaf. And sometimes when the sun is shining straight down, it's as blue as the sky. There are patches of soft sand on the bottom and little colorful pebbles too, and the water makes the colors look so bright and cheerful, like they've just been painted. Just imagine, there are people who were born and die without ever seeing the sea. People who never get to see Lamagari their whole life long. Whoop! I swooped down in the water and caught a big crab that was scurrying away to hide among the rocks. I carried it out to shore so I could show it to the others, but they were standing together over a huge dead fish that had washed up on the beach. I threw my crab back in the water, which was a shame. It even had a brown dot on its back, and ran over to the fish. It's a dolphin, Artemis said. Nolis insisted that it wasn't, so we sent Myrto to bring Grandfather. It most certainly is a dolphin, he said when he saw it. Then he asked, do you know the story of Arion and the dolphin? None of us did. So Grandfather took us over to a spot on the beach where the big rocks and the pine trees cast a deep shade and told us about Arion, who was a singer, in ancient times, of course, since Grandfather only knows stories from long ago, and once went on a journey by ship. The sailors on the ship wanted to steal everything he had and toss him into the sea, but before they could throw him overboard, he begged them to let him sing one last song. He picked up his guitar and sang, and then dove into the water. But a dolphin was passing by when he sang, and he was so entranced by his voice that it scooped Arion onto its back and swam, until finally it found dry land and set him down. That land was our island. So now you know, Grandfather said, that Arion was our island's first inhabitant. Grandfather couldn't tell us which beach the dolphin brought him to, but just imagine if it was the beach in Lamagari. I knew dolphins liked music, Artemis said. One day a big yacht was passing by, and you could hear guitars and singing from on board, and I saw a whole pod of dolphins swimming after it in the water. Nolis sat astride the dead dolphin and started to sing. He has such a beautiful voice, that he surely would have charmed the dolphin if it had been alive. Last summer, Nikos promised Nolis that as soon as things aren't so gloomy anymore, he'll take him to Athens and send him to school and even to the conservatory when he's older. I don't know what's come over all the grown-ups these days, why they're always calling things gloomy. Before we came to Lamagari every evening when Father came home from work, Grandfather would ask, "What's the news?" "Things are looking gloomy," Father would reply, shaking his head. "You don't think we're headed for a dictatorship, do you?" Grandfather would ask. "All I know is these are very dark days," Father would answer. "The king wouldn't let that happen," Aunt Despina would interject. Then the adults would start arguing, and they were even worse than us bickering about who got to ride in the barrel. When we asked Grandfather what it meant for things to be looking gloomy, he said it meant that democracy was dead. Not from the golden age of Pericles, but today's democracy. Then he told us an ancient proverb, but it was so ancient we didn't understand a single word. And so, when our cat gave birth to 2 little kittens, one dark gray and the other white, Myrto and I named them Gloom and Democracy. Grandfather laughed a lot when we told him, but Aunt Despina didn't think it was funny at all. "It's our fault," she fretted, "for talking about these things in front of the children. The grown-ups just confused us kids even more. That's almost always how it goes." In the end, all we knew was that if things weren't so gloomy at the end of the summer, Nikos would take Nolis back with him to Athens, which meant that this year, Nolis was almost as excited as we were for our cousin to come. When we got bored of the dolphin, we rode in the barrel some more, then clambered around on the rocks, then went back to the beach. That first day in Lamagari, we played every game we could think of, as if we'd be leaving again soon and had to fit everything in. We gathered crabs, seashells, even an entire bucket of sea urchins. Artemis showed us how to crack their shells open from the underside so we could suck out the eggs without pricking ourselves on the spines. That night we could barely keep our eyes open, and when Aunt Despina said, "Well, girls, go and wash your feet," we wished we were like the kids from the shanties who just curled up as they were on a rag rug on the floor. By the time we were done washing our feet, we didn't feel sleepy anymore, and when we got into bed, Myrto and I started quarreling again about what we should name the barrel. I was dying to name it David Copperfield. "That's the stupidest name I ever heard," Myrto said angrily. "I was right when I said you still think like a baby. Just imagine calling a barrel David Copperfield." "Why?" I insisted. "It's such a great name. We'll write it on the barrel in red paint, and when people see it from far off, they'll say, 'Look, here comes David Copperfield.'" "Don't you dare tell the other kids," Myrto said. "They'll just laugh at you." By then we were shouting so loudly that Grandfather came up to see what was going on. The ancients had a saying, "Thimokrati," he told us. It means, hold your anger. If one of you says something out of anger, the other should count to 10 before she responds, to give the anger a chance to pass. When Grandfather left, Myrto started up again. "How did you even think up something so stupid?" 1, 2, 3, I counted to myself. "Even Lavyi would laugh at you," Myrto added when I didn't respond. 4, 5, 6. "Of course you're not talking. What could you possibly say?" 7, 8, 9. Myrto threw her pillow at me, and the corner hit me in the eye. "A lot of good Grandfather does, coming in and telling you Thimokrati and count to 10. I dashed over and pinched her, and she kicked me, and then we lay back down on our beds, saying stubbornly, "Vesa, Vesa." Then it was quiet. I was itching to know if Myrto had fallen asleep. But pretty soon, I heard her voice again, at a whisper. "Veha, I've got it. We'll call the barrel Arian." "Veha," I said, and fell asleep. Thanks for listening.